finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo and no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Hey everybody, welcome back this week. This episode, we are talking about optimal human health and what that entails with our special guest today, Dr. Doug Lucas. Before we dive into that, though, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor this week, which is New Leaf Hyperbarics in Eugene, Oregon. You might ask, what is that? Well, New Leaf Hyperbarics and Wellness mission is to give our community the ability to take back the power of their own wellness through knowledge, sharing, and compassion. They specialize in mild pressure hyperbaric therapy, incorporating synergistic modalities and supplements to help your mind and body heal, build, and thrive. You can visit New Leaf Hyperbarics in Eugene on their website at newleafeugene.com. That's NEWLEAF Eugene.com. Check out their website for all they have to offer. They have, in addition to the hyperbaric oxygen therapy, they have massage therapy as well. And if you have been following us on our social media, you have seen that we have been customers and fans of their therapies. I am like over the moon about how it heals my joint pain combined with the infrared light. And Tim says he gets bionic man vision. So check it out. If you have any questions, let us know. They are located at 1200 Executive Parkway in Eugene, Oregon. And now, super excited on this episode for us to talk about optimal health and just what that is. Our guest today, Dr. Doug Lucas, who is on the East Coast, actually is a board-certified orthopedic surgeon who's made a giant transition from orthopedic surgery to health optimization. He finished his training at Stanford in foot and ankle surgery, practiced orthopedic surgery for 6 years, and during that time, he developed a passion for prevention and optimizing patients' health by seeing how they really lacked a lot of things going on in care, especially of the diabetic patient that he dealt with. He now has created his own business and sees patients in his practice called Optimal Human Health, where he and his team offer telehealth services nationwide, focusing on restoring patients' stamina, ambition, vitality, energy, and drive. And he has a special focus on bone health and osteoporosis, which he runs as well. So stay tuned for our talk with him on that. If you want to learn how to optimize your health as you age and prevent some serious conditions as well, it's a really good discussion. So here we go. All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. And today we have with us Dr. Doug Lucas. Super excited to have him here. He is on the east side of the country. And as I said earlier, he is here with us talking about his company, Optimal Human Health. And he really has a focus and love for optimal bone health, given his background. So we're super excited to have you here today. Welcome to the show with us.
Thank you so much, May, Tim. Glad to be here.
So why don't you, so I don't butcher it, give us, our listeners, just a bit of a background on your training, what specialty you're in, and the transition that you made to where you are now.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm traditionally trained as an orthopedic surgeon. So I did all the traditional orthopedic surgery training, but I was brought up through the osteopathic pathway. So a little bit different philosophy, a little more holistic, if you will, with those osteopathic tenets. And then when I got into practice, I quickly realized that I was on the wrong end of care for me. I loved what I did as a surgeon. I really enjoyed the actual physical side of it, but I felt very disempowered in the office because I didn't have the ability to help prevent the care that I was ultimately providing. I had a big passion for nutrition, even more so now, but then and realized that a lot of the diabetic care that I was doing, I could have prevented if they had come to me under a different circumstance. And so I started realizing, hey, I should maybe be on the other side of this. And then the more I learned about different fields of medicine where that were true, I quickly realized that I needed to make a shift. So about 3 years into practice, I started getting more education. I did 2 additional fellowships, one in functional medicine, some additional training in hormone optimization, and then kind of slowly made this transition into my own practice and health optimization.
So what did that feel like? You know, there's a lot of training. You're fellowship trained in foot and ankle, I believe.
Right.
So, so that was a lot of, input, costs, time to get to that side. What did that kind of feel like to go, I'm not doing the right thing here? And kind of because that's a courageous move. I mean, there's a lot of people that kind of get the golden handcuffs and they go, I can make a decent living doing this for the next, 20, 30 years. Most people don't do that. What was it that did you have an epiphany? Were you standing on a mountain and saw a rainbow or something, or what happened?
Yeah, I was practicing in Colorado at the time, actually. So the rainbow metaphor and mountain metaphor, I guess, could exist. But I mean, really, it happened over time. But there were certain points at which I remember there was one patient in particular that just really pushed me. This was actually after I moved to North Carolina and joined a private group. And I remember taking care of this diabetic patient. I was on call at the main hospital here, and he was really sick. He got septic. So for your non-medical listeners, means that he had bacteria in his bloodstream and he was going to die. And so we had to take him to the operating room, urgently at whatever, 2 or 3 in the morning. And he was a diabetic patient who had, I learned later, been very diligently following the instructions of his physician team. He had become very obese. He could barely walk. He had ulcer. I mean, just as the sick diabetic, as sick as you can imagine. And so we cut his leg off at 3 a.m. to save his life. And I remember putting him on the table and, wrestling with his leg, which was as big as my chest, and thinking just like, this poor guy, if he had better advice, this wouldn't happen. And why am I sitting here? I have the knowledge that I could help this guy. I'm sitting here at 3 a.m, and ignoring my own family obligations and all the other things in my life. Yes, this is important. And yes, we're saving this guy's life, but this isn't where I need to be. So that was a big one. And then I was really fortunate, that my wife, is very entrepreneurial. And so we have 2 incomes. And so, together we could say, look, we're definitely not at a point where I could not work, because I didn't retire, 3 years into practice, but we were at a point where we could say, look, we don't necessarily need as much income coming from me. So can I do this? So, as a team, sort of saying, hey, this is a better approach for us, for our family. Let's do this. And it also happens to fit with my passion. So really, really fortunate and blessed to be able to say, this is my path.
So, speaking to before we go forward to where things are now, because man, it's so big on some of the physician websites that I'm on and different groups, and physician burnout, or physicians realizing early in their career, I mean, even in internship, sadly, and residency fellowship, that this is not the path that they want, and they're feeling, afraid to jump ship or change. And even docs that are, years into practice, to have really it takes guts to kind of go, okay, I'm going to do like a total pivot, and that's okay. And obviously you have to have the support and backing, but was there at any point, did you get flack from either coworkers, colleagues, people going like, what are you doing?
Yeah. I mean, I'm still kind of in it, I've been doing this for a few years now, but there are people that I haven't seen from training. And I expect to get that to some extent. My father, I come from a medical background. So my father was a surgeon. And when I told him that I was going to stop operating, he had a really hard time with that. He said, but you spent how long? And the people that trained you spent how long? And, how dare you do that, really, is the mentality. But ultimately, if I'm not there showing up my best, I don't want a surgeon that isn't showing up as his best, and I look at it like a performance. And if I'm showing up to stage, not ready, or without my heart in the game, you don't want me there. However, that said, the role is important. And what I would say for the people the docs that you're interacting with they're realizing, hey, this isn't for me. There are so many opportunities out there. If you went through medical school, you have the credentials. That doesn't mean you have to practice a traditional practice. There are so many ways to make an income. It's just not potentially as steady. And that's what I was afraid of, is walking away from that steady paycheck, especially as a hospital employed orthopedic surgeon, we get paid well. So walking away from that income was really hard, and that really challenged me. And that's when I just really had to ask the question of, is this, what's right for me? And listening to actually the answer as it came back.
No, I love that. I think it's really important that we touched on that, because I know that so many people are struggling with that. We've gone through a similar thing where, yes, once you are in a role and the money is, I wouldn't say easy, but that's the main thing to keep you in. And your heart's not in it, then it's the wrong thing and the wrong reason to be there. And so I applaud you for doing that. And I would say it is amazing how other people sometimes, like you said, your father really questioned that, how other people live through us. And ultimately, you're the one living your life. So you got to be happy. So
right.
Awesome.
But yeah, it's interesting, though, because, from our faith, I look at these black and white statements that Christ made. And one was, it doesn't matter if you inherit the whole world if you forfeit your soul. And we often put that, I think, at least in traditional fundamentalist Christianity, into this box of, don't trade the things of the world for hell, or for not getting heaven. But there's more to it than that. Okay. And we really, I had to get out of it to see it. We were trading our soul. Our souls were being eaten by what we were doing. And it was being eaten purely because it was easy to get paid to do it. Yeah. And I mean, I really felt like, it was ultimately for me, it was moral. I was being asked to do things that I felt that ultimately were immoral or unethical. And at that point, if you do unpleasant things for money, that's a job. If you do unethical or immoral things for money, then you're a whore. And I was not going to be anybody's whore.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And the more that medicine becomes more corporate, less individualized, less private practice, the more you do face those positions where you are, as a surgeon, for example, we're potentially being forced to use implants that we don't trust. The hospital system will only allow you to use certain things. And so you're starting to question your ethical and moral ground, still providing service, still serving. And so it starts to get really gray really fast. And where I struggled was, if I, let's say I wasn't in the position where we had a dual income and I had to make this decision, would I make it? I think it would have been a lot harder for sure. But, if I look at my list of, my priorities, where it's faith, family, fitness, finance, right, in that order, and ultimately at the bottom, that's where my job comes. And so I was coming home from my work just miserable, and I was grumpy, and my family didn't want to be around me. And, my wife was like, you have no joy in your life, and so yeah, I would have probably made the same decision. It may have taken longer. But could I have done that job? I could have, but I would have been trading exactly what you said. I would have been trading ethical and moral boundaries to be able to make the money. And that's not what I want to do, or what I was trained to do.
We love the 4 F's you just threw out there.
Yeah, we actually have an episode. We actually have an episode called "We Have 4 F's to Give," and
those are them.
Those are the F's.
I love that. Yeah, yeah. I have to give credit to. So I heard those for the first time from Bedros Keuilian. I don't know if you guys know Bedros. But
we thought we were at OL.
Did you make it up? Yeah, you may have made it up. They're very you're going to lead down those 4 F's. But I heard that from him, and I have to give him a shout out to that, because that was really helpful for me.
Now we got to check that out. Interesting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, so tell us about optimal human health and, kind of what that looks like and what you're doing now.
Yeah. So what I found is I started to figure out, okay, I'm stepping out of the traditional medical model. Who do I want to help? My wife, I mentioned, she's entrepreneurial. She runs a weight loss business. And so I found that the patients or the clients that were coming through her program, they would come out on the other side, and one of her big things is maintenance. There are a ton of ways to lose weight. How do you maintain weight loss? And so she has this, maintenance program. It's free and forever, and it's awesome. But some people would come out on the other side, and they wouldn't have the medical support that they needed. And whether that be hormone optimization, thyroid optimization, gut health, whatever. There's so many different avenues and things that can catch people that they end up failing because they couldn't get the treatment that they needed. So that's kind of where I started. And I said, okay, well, how do I help these people? And ultimately that's functional medicine, it's hormone optimization. In that path, I also found precision health. So the use of genetics in this like really cool new field of genetics and epigenetics. And so I started figuring out, okay, how do I wrap all these things together? And ultimately decided on the platform that I have now, which are these 6-month programs where we basically get data, help people to get to their goals, and then reassess after 6 months. So it's not a traditional model right now, although I'm considering changing that because I see some value in it. But right now, I just love this, like, take you where you are, identify your issues, get all the data, and then deliver you somewhere in 6 months.
So having just gone through some personal training, which was super fascinating, because before what I could do is kind of eat whatever I want, and I would just rack up more miles running and I could kind of maintain my weight. And then as I got older, hormones take a dump, you start getting injured. I just was water skiing this morning, and now I have this massive wrap on my leg so my Baker's cyst doesn't explode and kill my thigh. So, you see this, and, it was really interesting doing things that I had never done before. Like I had never counted macros. I had never weighed food. I had never tracked these things, and clearly I needed to. And, then May started it, and we're like, wow. And then, we've actually thought a lot about kind of what you're doing, which is the whole concept. Well, why don't we just do that same concept as essentially personal training, but with a medical license? Because there's so many other things we can do. We can prescribe medications if need be. We can assist people on what supplements do and don't work. The gut health thing is that's a whole other, we've done an entire episode on that, and we'll be continuing to follow that up, because that's a whole other world that's messing people up that they don't even notice.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, to Tim's point, I've probably always had a little bit more interest in incorporating that side of things into my practice with my patients, because women are always asking about the hormone thing, as well as, I don't know, maybe women ask more about weight loss, what they recommend. And I've been a pretty fit, an active athlete all my life. So I always get the whole, how do you stay so skinny? What do you do? So I would do that. But as time has gone on, and now you can actually get certifications in it. You can get actually like a subspecialty. I mean, it's becoming its own recognized field of medicine. And now with, like you said, the epigenetics and peptides, and it just goes on and on. There's so much more out there that, we're getting interested as well. So you did a certification in that, and now basically in your practice, is it a primary care practice, or is it more people come to you for kind of a niche thing?
Yeah, it's more, again, I call it health optimization because I lack a better word. So definitely not primary care, because I can't pretend that I would actually be a good primary care doctor. I'm just not trained to be, and I don't employ one at this point, although that's also on the table. But so really we call it health optimization because it's not integrative medicine only, because integrative medicine can mean anything. It's not functional medicine only, because anybody with any credentials can actually be a functional medicine practitioner. And so I lack a better term for it. So I call it health optimization. And that's been one of the challenges in getting the word out, is that nobody's looking for those terms, but I don't know what else to call it, because we really are in a unique space where we're adding, I guess, the word precision medicine. Again, that's the genetic side, but it's not just precision medicine either, and so we're in this space where we're combining all of them. And I think this space is growing, and there are some companies that I think, going to really probably blow up the market, which we can talk about. But it's early. And so people still aren't necessarily looking for it. They're really more being driven to these platforms, either by a specific condition that they treat, or by a specific, a lead magnet, like a celebrity.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, people see hormone optimization clinics, which pop up all over And sometimes they're just
Right.
overseen by a physician and have a lot of mid-levels sort of doing, I call cookbook kind of
Right.
hormone optimization.
Bare bones, race to the bottom hormone optimization. Yeah.
Right. And then I know there's we interviewed a few people and know people that are doing sort of optimal health type stuff in a family practice or primary care clinic. But I think unless people are living maybe in a big city or, Florida or a big aging population, this new optimal health clinics are kind of a new thing popping up all over or just starting to pop up, would you say?
Yeah. And I think one of the challenges, it's really hard to know, how different is it? So I see, the words integrative medicine, and you look under the hood and it's a primary care office that has, maybe a nutrition coach, right? Like, okay, it's integrative. Cool. Better than standard of care, but by how much? You see the same thing with precision. Locally, there's a group that calls themselves Precision Health, and they do run genetics, but they don't actually do anything with it. So it doesn't actually change the standard of care. And so it's a marketing tool. And so, yeah, it's really challenging right now to figure out, okay, who do I trust? And then a lot of times it's cash pay, and we can talk about cash versus insurance and how that falls into this space, but it's an investment, and it can be a significant investment. And so it really is hard to learn, okay, how do you trust somebody in this space? Who is this, and is it really worth my time and money?
So if somebody, is listening to this and is like has a non-medical background, it's more of a patient looking to go, oh, I'm really interested in maximizing all my health while I'm here on this earth, and I want to get my optimal health and get my hormones balanced, and I want to take all the little things for my the spermidine capsules and all that kind of stuff, and the genetics for longevity. Then is that the thing that you're interested in, and they would want to look for somebody that does those?
Yeah. Those are my people, right? So they're not necessarily sick, although I work with plenty of sick people too. But I just had a conversation with a patient, a guy, he just started with me, and he has gone really from optimization practice to optimization practice, not because he's not happy. He just wants a different opinion, right? So he's just sort of like, he's doctor shopping across the country, and people look at him and say, why do you spend all this money? You're healthy. And he says, exactly. I know a lot about my body. And so that's great. I love working with people at that end, because really it's just about, dialing in what they're already doing. This guy's already on testosterone. He's very dialed in, but he's got some tweaks here, some tweaks there, different genetic algorithm. He's on probably 30 supplements. We should maybe cut that down to 10. So all those things, right? But then there's the populations that I do really enjoy working with. I love working with the diabetic population. That is a very, very misunderstood, I don't even want to call it a disease. It's a very misunderstood nutrition problem. And I love working with bone health, like you mentioned earlier, because it's something that really lends itself to reversing the loss of bone and actually improving bone health without necessarily taking medications, although we do that too. That's that power you mentioned, Tim, the fact that we can do all of it, right? So we do nutrition, we do functional testing, we add on peptides, we add on hormones, and then we add on medications if we need to. Like that's what it should be. But yet that's really rare.
You mentioned exciting though. Sorry, Tim.
No,
I was just going to say, because isn't this what doctors should be able to do? We should just be able to pull from all these resources to like actually help our patients have optimal health.
Yeah,
and you shop for sporting goods every which way but Wednesday. Why not shop for healthy stuff for your body?
Well, because medicine, I thought this a long time ago, but I was not able to wrap words around it until the last 2 years with what's happened in COVID. Medical training in particular, and the practice of medicine specifically, is not a science-based, patient-centered enterprise anymore. What it is it is an authoritarian system where you take highly trained labor and get them to manipulate them and get them to do what you need to do to increase the bottom line of the health system, the insurance companies, and big pharma as much as you can. That's what it is. And, sometimes that's fine. Sometimes that's fine. I mean, if you have Hodgkin's lymphoma, I have no problem with the massive, big pharma, big cancer center. I mean, they do a pretty good job. People used to get that, in the early 70s, and they had 6 months. Now they're cured. So It works.
Right.
It works in certain situations. So, two things can be true at the same time. But then if you compare that to what you mentioned about, diabetics, I am almost convinced that they want diabetics to get sicker, because how we treat them is exactly how to make them sicker. So somebody comes in, they're type 2 diabetic, they're morbidly obese. What they have is they have a metabolic problem. They have a metabolic problem that can be often cured, which physicians bristle at the word cure, but can be cured with lifestyle management. If you lose weight, if you eat the right kind of foods, and if you exercise properly, you can reverse that. It is a metabolic error brought on by genetics and by lifestyle. But what do? We see them. We treat one thing, which is blood sugar. We treat it essentially one way, which is either super expensive medications or insulin. Insulin is a growth hormone that makes you fatter.
Right.
So their blood sugars get better, their A1C gets better, and they gain another 30 pounds. Right. And I'm like, how does that make any sense?
Well, let's ask the
oh my gosh, let me just share with you this story. So my wife, when she has a challenging client, she'll frequently ask me, and I sit on her board, her scientific advisory board, for this reason. So patient in one of our clinics, a guy, I think he's probably in his 60s. He's a type 2 diabetic. He's on insulin. And he starts the program. And very quickly, when they start the program, they start to drop their insulin needs, eventually drop their oral medications, and you can get off of everything. I would say I like to use the word remission rather than complete reversal, because I don't know that once you're diabetic, you can get all the way back. I think you can definitely get a heck of a lot better, and you cannot be diabetic anymore, but I don't know that you're ever going to be normal. So I like to leave metformin in there as sort of like, you can get off of all your medications plus or minus metformin. And I take metformin, so it's not just for diabetes. But so this guy's on this process, and he has a low, and we in that platform. This is not in my platform, but this is a coaching platform where they have to work with their own doctor and peel off medications, and lows happen because the medications can cause that. And so the guy's doctor says, you have to stop this program, it's killing you. And so now my wife says, can you talk to this guy? And so here's my rebuttal. And this is really challenging to do. So when you talk to the client, you say, look, your doctor says that we're killing you because we're putting you on this carbohydrate restricted diet. Okay, so let me just point it out another way. Your doctor is giving you insulin. You actually don't have as much of a blood sugar problem as you have an insulin problem. So we're actually treating an insulin problem with more insulin because your body can no longer make enough of it. But it's the insulin that's causing your heart disease that will kill you. It's your insulin that's causing the big vessel disease in your legs that will end up causing an amputation. So your doctor says that we're killing you. Actually, I feel like it's the other way around. And then, let them decide. Now, that's a really tough position to put somebody in, right? So now we're actually pitting them against their doctor, which I really don't like doing. But when I hear a doctor looking at their diabetic to say, you can't reverse your diabetes because then I don't know how to dose your medication, I feel like the cart's definitely before the horse.
Well, but there's no, if COVID has taught us anything, it's taught us that most physicians are not free thinkers at all. So true. I mean, they beat the free thinking out of you in medical school. I mean, I'm convinced of that. And it's just it's beyond belief to me. I mean, I read an article today in Medscape, and it was about how to manipulate patients so that they vaccinate their 6-month-old with the COVID vaccine. And I'm like, it wasn't studied. They showed no endpoint that more kids survived because they all survive. Way more kids die backyard pools than ever died in the pandemic with regards, especially healthy kids. They were all profoundly ill. But we're going to manipulate patients. And one of the arguments, one of the bylines that you're supposed to tell patients is that the CDC, the NIH, and the FDA recommend this. Therefore, you should do it. And I'm like, that's exactly why I wouldn't do it. Right. I mean, they couldn't make a better argument for me to disagree with the treatment.
Well, and I think that. I mean, that's a great example. But I think if you look at all guidelines, I think all guidelines for any subspecialty should be drawn into question. Because if you think about who makes the guidelines, where are they coming from? They are never in the best interest of all the patients, right? They are typically driven by industry interests, pharmacologic interests. and they're always going to lean a direction. And nothing in medicine is that clear. And so I look at that, I agree with everything you said, but also I look at it from the hormone guidelines from ACOG. They say take as short a dose of hormones as possible for the short a time as possible. And it's the complete wrong approach, because what are you trying to treat? You're not, I guess if you're only trying to treat the FDA approved thing, then yeah, that's the answer. That's not why we give hormones to people long term. It's not why we give hormones to men, right? And so I think the guidelines coming from all subspecialties should be drawn into question, and the physicians need to be able to think for themselves. But you're right. It's so easy, especially in this world where we get so subspecialized. When I was in my foot and ankle practice, I didn't even know, in the realm of orthopedics, what are the shoulder guys doing? What are the sports medicine guys doing? So I'm like, what are the guidelines from this? Because I can trust that. And to some extent, you can trust that there's evidence behind it, but is it really the right thing to do? And that's really, you're right. It's totally been taken away.
One of the big epiphanies for me, because I had bought the line that, randomized controlled trials were sort of the gold standard. And then we interviewed Harvey Risch, and he's like, I've done this my entire career. That's what I do. I read studies. I teach medical students how to interpret this data. And he goes, there's nothing that's more easily manipulated than a randomized controlled study. and then I never realized until COVID that when they do a they do a peer-reviewed journal article on a new medication that just got approved, or before it gets approved and they're going out for peer review, the peer reviewers don't get the original data. They get the industry produced endpoint data that they just sort of regurgitate out. They write a paper, and then the paper gets peer reviewed. Well, I'm like, but you don't know what kind of shenanigans went on.
Right.
And then we've interviewed
the
people
integrity. Right.
There's no integrity.
That's right. Yeah, because you're trusting. You're saying, well, it's peer reviewed, and while peer review is valuable, and randomized controlled trials are also valuable, the integrity of who's doing them is critical. And I would argue too that there are so many things. I see a lot of physicians who look at what I do and they say, well, show me the evidence, show me the randomized controlled trials that show that this is going to be effective. And the reality is that they will never be done. They're too expensive. They take too long. And some of these things can't be done. And so, I do a lot of things that are evidence-based, but there are no RCTs. And I'm comfortable with that because I'm looking at the person as an individual, looking at their very unique situation. And then we're drawing, from the best evidence that we can and coming up with a plan. But I see a lot of people saying, well, I can't do that because there are no RCTs. Same thing with reversing diabetes, right? How many RCTs are there on the nutrition approach of carbohydrate restriction? There are a few now. Thank you, Verta. There are a few, and they look awesome.
Wow.
And it's exciting. But even with them, physicians still in general will say, well, that can't be done.
Well,
As
right.
Tim's favorite line is, what is it about how many randomized controlled trials for, appendicitis are there? You're going to just like,
I got in debates with neurosurgeons saying that we shouldn't do something because there's no randomized controlled trials. And I'm like, dude, you're a neurosurgeon. Everything you do, nothing. You're making $1 million a year on procedures that are impossible to blind and impossible to randomize.
Right.
Like, really? No, you do it because if you have a brain tumor, it probably makes sense to take that thing out of your skull. Like, it's called common sense.
Right. Well, and so much of what we're trained, I mean, you mentioned that, how training has changed and medical school has changed, but so much of it is stayed the same. So much of it is based on dogma that's passed down from terrible evidence. I mean, I look at that in the nutrition world and it just drives me bonkers. The nutrition recommendations that are passed down over the last 70 years that are based on absolutely terrible or just expert opinion at the time, evidence that now there's great evidence to refute, but you can't change people's minds. It's mind blowing that people get caught up on that. And then yet you're right. Then go back to what they were doing, which isn't proven by RCT.
I remember, man, years ago when we were treating diabetics, when with what we've learned in med school, but even it goes across the board, even into, you send them to the nutritionist or the dietitian for advice, and then they put them on these massive carb things and get your snacks and carbs. And I'm like, but wait, Why are you giving them more carbs? Shouldn't they be getting like more protein and decreasing the carbs? No, protein, because you can't, because it's going to hurt their kidneys. I'm like, well,
Right.
really?
I got in arguments with these
So,
people,
yeah,
and I actually started a little like kind of mini foundation inside our system where I was doing a bunch of action sports and raising money for the diabetic educators. So we worked very closely together. And I said, no, these people are not type 1 diabetics. They're type 2 diabetics. They should be eating basically 0 carbs. Well, but that's their main source of energy. And I'm like, no, we can change their main source of energy.
Yeah.
That's
Well, you know, what's
the goal.
funny, Tim, is you can do it with type 1 diabetics too. And so you can decrease their carbohydrate intake. Now, you can't necessarily take it to 0, and you're not going to reverse their type 1 diabetes.
Right.
But you can actually improve. That's how a type 1 diabetic loses weight, is because their insulin is too high. And so if you can switch that around. But I say my type 2 diabetics like this initial convert, I love having it. And I've spent probably way too much time doing it. But I love having it because I say, look, you have a carbohydrate intolerance problem. And the traditional way to treat your carbohydrate intolerance problem is to give you more carbohydrates and then give you medications to manage it. It's like saying if somebody has celiac disease, which is a gluten intolerance or a gluten allergy, technically, it's like saying you have a gluten intolerance, you have celiac disease. Here, eat this many grams of gluten throughout the day, and we're going to give you this medication so that you can tolerate it. Look, why? Why would you do that? You don't need carbohydrates at all. There is no minimum requirement for carbohydrates. The minimum requirement is 0. So why are you taking any? Now, I would argue too that type 2 diabetics don't need to eat 0. Everybody's different. There's a level, and for very severely metabolically sick people, it's really low, and they are going to be in nutritional ketosis, and that's okay. And the Virta studies I mentioned earlier demonstrate that, where they put these guys in ketosis, and they do fantastic. And they put diabetes, I think they use the word remission too, but they put diabetes in remission at really high rates. And I think they have 7-year data now, and they stay that way. Wow.
So I'm just curious, because I know people listening are going to want to know, like, your thoughts on when you have your patients with diabetes. Do you start them off and follow them on a certain amount of macro ratios with carb, protein, fat? Or do you lean towards one type of diet? What do you recommend when you're starting to get them off their meds?
Yeah, so it really depends on what meds they're on. And so we have to take a deep dive and look and say, okay, are you on insulin? Are you on GLP-1 agonist? Are you on SGLT2 inhibitors? Because depending on what they're on, you actually can get into trouble. And I just recently had a patient who, we're always worried about this diabetic ketoacidosis thing, right? And we're like, is it possible to do that with a low carb diet? And my position has always been, it's not possible. And if you look at the Virta data, like, hundreds and hundreds of patients on all kinds of different meds, and it's never happened. And I, sure enough, had a patient who went into ketoacidosis. But it's because he was on a GLP-1 agonist and an SGLT2 inhibitor and metformin and insulin. And, so he was really sick. And, so he caught it. He's a physician, actually. And so he caught it, and he went to the ER, and he spent the weekend. Yeah, I know, right? Of course, it's another physician. But he spent the weekend in the ICU, and he was fine. And so what I learned from that is you have to be really careful, and you have to know what medications people are on and get them off of the SGLT2s and the GLP-1s out of the gate. GLP-1 is not as important as SGLT2s, but get them off of the medications that can cause, metabolic crisis. Insulin, you can eventually work down. And then again, most of the orals other than metformin, get them off of because they're garbage. And then eventually you can work them down. From a diet perspective, I start off relatively easy depending on where their where their medications are out of the gate. So like this gentleman I'm referring to, we started him out, at 100 grams of carbohydrates, and then started to bring it down. And that's when he got into trouble, is when we kind of got around 50 grams of carbs, because it was really low.
Yeah.
But one of his main goals too was weight loss. And we know that you have to get insulin requirements down. And we also do, we do advanced testing. So I know that from a C-peptide perspective, his pancreas wasn't making almost any insulin. So he's really almost type 1, So we were pushing him pretty hard, and it bit us. But in general, that doesn't happen. And you can restrict carbohydrates pretty hard out of the gate. What I tell people to focus on, though, is you mentioned good protein, and I totally agree. but you have to watch the protein, because protein also does have a slight insulin response. And so while I'm a huge advocate for optimized protein, and for most people that's up to a gram per pound of ideal body weight. So people call that high, I call that optimal. But then you have to fill in the gap with dietary fat and not be afraid of the dietary fat. And that's where most people fall on their face, because we've been told for the last 7 years, dietary fat is terrible. And so that's where people say, well, I'm going to restrict my carbohydrates and I'm going to restrict my fat and I'm going to do this. And we're like, well, what are you going to eat? You can only eat so much protein. And so, yeah, that's where you really have to like face that dogma and face your fear around dietary fat and recognize that it's the best fuel source that you can eat. And you just have to understand what it is.
I know, but it's so frightening how patients hear it. We hear it about, red meat bad and dietary fat bad, and just only, obviously the healthier you want to be picking your fats,
but the buffet of pasta is perfectly acceptable.
That's right. It's low fat. It's low fat, and then you put butter on it. No, yeah. Let me speak to that real quick, because I love this topic of saturated fat and red meat, because there is such a push, and maybe it's just the world I live in, but there's such a push against red meat and against cattle. And, I could talk about the environmental and the water and all of this stuff for a long time. But when it comes down to what we need as humans, the best protein source for an animal comes from an animal. It's just, I like how Paul Saladino just says it. He says it's different operating systems, right? Like we have this operating system, and our operating system understands information from the same operating system. And that just makes sense. The amino acids look the same, right? Red meat, though, is very unique in that it is very nutritionally dense, and it comes with a source of iron that is really hard to get from other places. It comes with the activated forms of vitamin A that are hard to get from other places, and it doesn't necessarily come with that much saturated fat. And here's the secret about saturated fat is that we run, like I said, genetics on all of our patients. The reason why we do that, some of the cool things are saturated fat tolerance. So there are some people that are saturated fat intolerant, but it's a minority of people. But it's important that if you are intolerant to saturated fat, because if you jump on carbohydrate restriction and you start mainlining saturated fat and your cholesterol goes up and your CRP and inflammatory marker goes up, that's actually not good for you either, right? And so it's really important that you know that. And so we can differentiate that out of the gate. And then for my diabetics, I'll say, look, yes, increase your dietary fat, but you have to watch saturated fat, keep it under this threshold, avocado oil, olive oil, this is where you're going to get and then we're going to actually start measuring macros, and we're going to dial them in. And I have a coach that I don't actually do all this. I have a coach that works with them, and can dial this all in. We have them track macros or take pictures of their food, whatever they're technologically capable of.
So I sorry, Tim, but I'm thinking, and just
you
jumped.
You never have to apologize.
Well, for cutting you off, for me getting to speak.
Yeah,
everybody who knows us
for
well,
cutting for cutting me off verbally, yes. For cutting me off otherwise, never. Thanks. I lost my train of thought. Back to the part about then the fat intolerance, saturated fat intolerance, which went bing in my head. So, lately I've been listening to a ton of podcasts on optimal health eating, Paul Saladino. At first I'm like, this guy's whack. But the more people that I have faith in and trust and follow, like Dr. Sabine Hazen on the gut microbiome, she was on our podcast and she's amazing. She's like, yes, everything he's saying is right. And some other people, and then there's, I forget his name, this guy, neurosurgeon, actually was a professional rugby player out of Australia or New Zealand, who's pretty much like Paul Saladino and really is a complete carnivore. Like he only eats meat continuously, but they can really back up what they're saying. And then I listened to some other specialists in, say, rheumatology and other people pushing plant-based diet because they say it cures autoimmune disease, especially rheumatologic conditions, and that those people with autoimmune rheumatologic conditions can't tolerate the saturated fat. And you hear, of course, anecdotal reports from patients that thrive on a plant-based diet. So my brain is thinking, and I don't know what your thought is that because maybe some of those people, a small amount of those people they can't tolerate the saturated animal fat, and that's why they don't do well on the high protein animal diet?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely potentially part of it. I think we are all so different genetically, and even when we run the genetics, we're looking at, I don't even know what percentage of the actual data that we're actually looking at. But certainly we could say that if you are going to have an inflammatory reaction to saturated fat and you tried keto, but you ate you ate bacon and you ate, ribeye 3 times a day, and yeah, you would have probably felt terrible. I experimented with carnivore myself. I didn't feel that good on it out of the gate, and I'm someone that's pretty carbohydrate restricted to begin with. And I don't know what I was missing, but I do feel like there was something that I was missing in my diet, and I didn't feel great on it. Now I love listening to Paul, and he has some great, Paul Saladino, and he
Yeah.
backs up everything he says with great evidence. But I will say I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, because his perspective is also a little bit biased in that if you're living an optimal life, and I look at him, living in, where does he live?
Right.
Costa Rica or somewhere in South
No,
America, and surfs 3 hours a day. Like, I mean, if I live that life, I may not care as much about my LDL cholesterol either. But the reality is that, like, I'm struggling to get enough sleep, and I live in, Asheville, North Carolina is a beautiful place, but I have 3 kids, and I have stress, and I have all these things. So, my
right.
CRP is not always zero. So I think that you have to take a little bit of that with a grain of salt. But I think that there's also people that are going to do well on a plant-based diet because they tolerate lectins better, because they don't, their gut lining, for whatever reason, is very resilient to the antitoxin or the anti-nutrients in plants. And you have to remember too that a lot of the data, when they look at, how good is a diet for you, the question is compared to what? So every diet has compared to the standard American diet, everybody got better. Well, of course they did. The standard American diet sucks. So if you compare, anything to garbage, it's going to look better. But what I would love to see, which is, again, this is an RCT, it'll never be done, a long-term vegan diet versus a well-done carnivore diet versus a well-done omnivore diet versus a well-done paleo, like actually, good food, not garbage processed food keto, and not garbage processed food vegan either. Give it a fair shot. But I think what we'll find is that the diet that doesn't give you the nutrients that you need, that that you have to supplement, which is a vegan diet, probably over the long term, you're not going to feel good. And I see that time and time again. Somebody's been plant-based for 5 years, 7 years, and they start to feel terrible because they're deficient.
Well, and I know there's guys on Instagram that are vegans that are super yoked and are really big and whatever. But generally speaking, the people I know and have done sports with, and, in and out of your family, circle of friends, etc., the vegans tend to look like concentration camp victims, and the carnivores tend to look like they actually go to the gym.
Right.
I mean,
and that's a little bit of bias there too, because the carnivores do actually go to the gym, right? And the vegans may not. And that's, and we have to remember too, like, I obviously have my own biases. But I agree, where I find that the people that eat a plant-based diet generally are not as active. Now, is that a bias because that's just who they are, or do they not eat enough protein, or is their testosterone terrible and they don't have them? I don't know. I don't know any of that because we don't have those studies. There are certainly people that eat a plant-based diet that look great, feel great, perform great. Like, you can't argue that that's not true, but that is a really small minority of the population.
What's your thought on the it's not a diet, but the heritage-based eating plan that?
Yeah, I was just going there.
Where people basically eat their ethnicity style. So if you are like a North American Eskimo, you can tolerate eating like literally whale blubber and and if you are from India, the country, you can do more of the lentils, rice. If you are from the North, not the Pacific Northwest, the British Isles, like myself.
Well, then
you're a meat and potatoes,
garbage, haggis. That was a great idea.
So, what's your thoughts on that? Because genetics has got to play some part of it.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I guess the question is, how far back are they talking? I haven't read into this at all, but just my first thought of it is that I hear a lot of this is especially true in like Native American, I see, and actually Indian culture as well, from India. And so the Native American culture, I see this. Obviously, diabetes is a huge problem in the Native American culture, right? And we've my wife has a clinic. We used to live in Colorado, and there are 2 tribes kind of on either side of that area that we lived in. And so we worked with a lot of Native American people. And the challenge there was they would say, well, my culture says that I was brought up eating these things. And so they would talk about things like fry bread, and they would talk about this like garbage food that actually has only been a part of their culture for maybe 2 generations. Right. And that's actually when all of their disease started. And they can thank us for that. We did that to them.
Yeah, they're not chasing buffalo anymore either.
That's right. That's right. And so my
Yeah.
question is, how far back are you going? Now you could argue like, do Chinese people tolerate white rice better because they're Chinese? Maybe, actually. Right. So they've been eating rice for a really, really long time.
Right.
And I think what's really a compelling story about that is that they have not been eating the whole kernel, like we say now, like, the brown rice, it's so good for you, right? No, they actually manually husked rice thousands of years ago, which tells me that there's a reason for that. And when you get back to the lectin story and say, well, like, why is brown rice better for you? It's not better for you. It's not better for anybody. Like, think about why they would do that by hand. It wasn't for fun. Why would they do that by hand in China? So could they tolerate rice better? Yeah, they probably do. And you can actually see that until we started adding in garbage Western food into the Chinese culture, they didn't really have significant rates of diabetes. And actually, I think the first time I saw that was on Paul Saladino's podcast, and I forget the guy he was interviewing, but really showed this parallel with seed oils and the rise of diabetes and obesity in the Asian cultures.
Well, it's really interesting because I was first introduced to that whole concept in Good Calories, Bad Calories.
Oh, Gary Taubes, great book.
Yeah, fantastic book. And I really loved the anthropological side of it, where, they find these people that are, in some remote Pacific island that have lived by themselves for, thousands of years. They eat basically fish and some fruit and a little bit of vegetables, but they don't grow much there for vegetables.
Sounds like what we're eating lately.
And these people, and they're super, they obviously are really active because they're subsistence fishing and they're swimming and they're paddling and, whatever else. And, they do fantastic. Like their rates of disease weren't high. Their rate of obesity was virtually non-existent. And then as soon as you put them into a Western, standard American diet, and it's like Cheetos and burgers and soda and all, they just explode and are diabetics. Like, makes sense to me. Their bodies were trained to hold on to calories and to be, fed tons of protein. And as soon as you alter that, and now they're holding on to really bad calories that do really bad things to you.
Right. Yeah, well, and I think one of the, sorry to cut you off there, man, but I think that one of the cultures that's really interesting in that book, and I would encourage everybody to read that book because it's a little bit older now, but it still stands as just a great review of what's happening in nutrition. And I think I'm going to probably butcher the name of this, but I think the Tokelauans is one of the cultures they talk about in that book. And it's a really interesting study because half of that population, I think we did this to them. Again, we do so many great things, but half of that population was basically removed from the island and put on the mainland, which had been westernized. And then the island stayed pristine for at least another, couple of decades or whatever. And then they compared the two. And so it was amazing. So it was actually like a controlled study, and people on the mainland, and this was a while, this was kind of before ultra processed food. So it was kind of before seed oils ish and before, really garbage food. So this was actually just the increase in carbohydrates and white sugar, in its raw form, organic, I guess. And they did terrible. And so I think that that's a great example of, what we've done since really the 40s, 50s, but certainly since the 1970s where we demonized dietary fat.
Yeah. Well, all you got to do is I love looking at these pictures from the advertisements, and there's this famous picture of these people at the end of World War II sitting in a movie theater. And there's 2 things you see. There's one fat guy, and there's 2/3 of the group are smoking, and no one else is obese. Like it's just crazy, and this was still, early 50s. So relative prosperity. It wasn't that people were starving to death. They were actually in a movie theater. So they were doing leisure. And then there's advertisements from that time for weight gain medications. So women could gain weight because everyone wanted to look like Marilyn Monroe and not be the skinny girl. And I'm like, something changed at by the mid 60s that completely altered the trajectory of where we were.
Do you remember what some of those weight gain? I don't know if you noticed what they were actually advertising for.
Speed. Yeah.
Those are the weight loss with speed.
Those are weight loss.
Amphetamines.
No,
Oh, yeah,
it was
yeah.
like sugar water, right? Like it was actually adding sugar in to help you gain weight.
Well, there was a whole ad
Wow.
campaign for the benefits of sugar. Beneficial
Wow.
energy, instant
Hello,
energy.
Coca-Cola.
Like, no, it was amazing. Like
I don't know why I was thinking speed, but
it was, I think, the early.
maybe I need some.
It was the early. Well, you could get amphetamines over the counter in the early '60s. Viva la past. But it was fascinating because eventually they had to like recant all this. But there was an ad campaign from the soft drink manufacturers that glucose was great. Everyone needs glucose. Your brain runs on glucose. You come home and look at Sally. She's baton twirling and studying. Why? Because she's filling herself with glucose. And you sit there and you go, what?
It's nuts. Well, I want to be able to jump into your passion, which is the bone health optimization, and just sort of pick your brain on kind of your thoughts on various things in that, and where do you even start with coming in? I mean, do people come to you with questions about that specifically, or is it something that when they're there, you like to just kind of go over that and say, hey, what are you taking for hormones? What are you doing for weight training?
Yeah.
I mean, you just kind of dive in with that with them, or how's that work?
I think occasionally somebody will come in for health optimization and we sort of latch on to you've had a DEXA, you have osteoporosis, maybe let's switch gears. But in general, this is something that we're looking for these patients specifically because they really have nowhere to go. This is one of those things that, kind of like diabetes and hormone optimization, where this is something that's just really been brushed under the rug and we don't talk a lot about it, but it's really like poorly mismanaged. And so I saw it as an orthopedic surgeon, obviously taking call, treating lots of hip fractures. Patients would come in, they didn't know that they had poor bone quality. These are, you can imagine, the 90-year-old patients, people that are sort of, end of life. You almost kind of expect it, although the reality is that probably we shouldn't expect it. But really what really sticks out to me are the people they're in their 60s, right? For women that are like potentially, barely postmenopausal and they break a hip. And typically, just if your listeners don't know this, a lot of times the bone quality is so poor, you get this story of, I feel like my hip broke and then I fell. I didn't fall and break a hip, right? I mean, you guys are in the urgent care, right? You hear this all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, my hip broke. And so literally the strongest bone in your body just broke under normal physiologic, a rotation or a whatever. And then you fall to the ground and it's miserable. And so we repair those almost all the time, because if you don't repair them, the mortality rate is 90% at 12 months. And so we repair them and we get people going. The challenge then is that, okay, now what? And it's not just hip fracture. Really, an osteoporotic fracture is a hip fracture, a pelvis fracture, a forearm, upper arm, kind of depending on the definition, and then spine. And so I didn't see the spine fractures in my practice, but the sad thing is that typically nothing happens at that point, but we know by definition they have osteoporosis, plus or minus they've been screened. And I'll talk about that in a second. But typically we would say, okay, you have osteoporosis, you should follow up with your primary care doc. But primary care docs don't want to deal with it. They don't want to deal with those medications. And then they would say, well, you should go see an endocrinologist. But endocrinologists are too busy managing other stuff. And then they might fall into like rheumatology and they're like, why are you here? So it's just one of those things where nobody wants it. It's like a hot potato. And so there has been a movement, and I'm a part of this, to encourage what we call fracture liaison services, where orthopedic clinics are actually starting to capture this. And they have an insurance model where they're starting to help people to get on medications, which again, we can talk about, but to get on medications to prevent refracture. And that is noble and real. And the pharmacologic remedies serve a purpose, but it's actually missing the big picture, which is, why are you losing bone in the first place? And especially when you're young, I mean, when you're in your 50s and 60s, why do you have bone loss? And that's the question that we want to answer, and then start integrating the tools that we have to say, okay, well, let's stop the bone loss, and then let's turn it around and move it the other way. Because typically it's a gut problem, which nobody wants to talk about or deal with. It's an adrenal problem, which nobody wants to talk about or deal with. It's an immune problem, right? All these things that like, they're sort of like taboo. Like, oh, I don't want to deal with that thing. And they don't have the tools to. So that's what we do. And that's why I already looked at all those things with optimal human health. And so I thought, well, God, I should just be doing this for people that have osteoporosis because it's what they need. And I'm already doing it. I have the system in place. So it just sort of made sense.
Well, I'm just thinking back to way back when I was doing primary care. I mean, it's one of the things that where females would get the focus, right? It's because, especially depending on their risk factors, premenopausals, I do a lot of counseling focusing on that but post, it's hormone optimization, looking at, their body types and their genetics, and if they're smokers, and, if they had an eating disorder, et cetera, and, how much calcium in their diet. Men, it was like not a big focus, even in med school. And then every now and then you'd get the surprise guy that had one of those pathologic fractures, like, oh, well, what do we do with the guy?
Right.
I mean, kind of a thing, which, can happen just as much in men. But you're right. I would see, actually, in my practice, I would see all the spine fractures. And you see these poor little old ladies, and not even all little old ladies, but it's like, this is horrible now that you're at this point. And we never really placed much emphasis or on the pre part and focusing on that.
Right.
So what do you do with patients to kind of go over that? And what do you recommend to people, male and female, to do to optimize bone health?
Yeah. So, so the first part I say is, and this is the challenge in doing this in this business model, is that I'm treating something that a lot of people don't know that they have. So that's not a great business model. But I would say the most important thing out of the gate is screening. And if you look at screening rates, less than 10% of people that meet the criteria for screening, which aren't even good criteria, but less than 10% are actually getting screened. And it's because insurance, Medicare, I think, reimburses docs like whatever, $30 to do a DEXA. So it doesn't make sense for a doc to have a DEXA machine anymore. And it's sort of fallen out of favor. And DEXA is not a perfect study, but it's something. But nobody's getting screened. I shouldn't say that. Not enough people are getting screened is the right thing. And then there are better screening studies which are getting sort of pushed under the rug because they're challenging the status quo of the great DEXA. And yet the DEXA is not very good. So people aren't getting screened. So if you are at risk, you need to be screened. And that is any woman over 65, any woman over 70 of the current recommendations. But all of those risk factors that you mentioned, I love this concept of like primary osteoporosis is just age-related osteoporosis. Well, that's crap. Yeah. Because we don't just lose bone when we get old. What happens when we get old is one of those other things you mentioned is happening, right? It's women lose estrogen in postmenopausal state, men lose testosterone, you have gut dysfunction, you're not eating enough protein, you decided to go plant-based, like all those things happen, right? And so really, if you have any of those things, which is arguably everybody, because that also includes metabolic dysfunction, insulin resistance, obesity, chronic inflammation, it's all of us should get a DEXA. So, everybody's going to rush out and get their DEXA scanned right now because I just said that, yeah. Which would be fine. So get screened if you have any risk factors, and there are a lot of them, and it's really probably all of us. So then what do we do about it? Well, it depends on how severe it is. With everybody, we kind of have this like starting point, right? And the starting point is we look at an extensive blood panel that looks at bone turnover markers. So you can actually tell how quickly are you breaking down bone? How quickly are you building bone? Those are rarely obtained and not often covered by insurance, and yet they're really important. Also, some other studies like a 24-hour urine calcium. These things aren't actually that easy to get, but it gives you a lot of information. So we get a lot of stuff like that, and then we also just layer it on top of our optimization panel. So it has a ton of fun stuff in it. And then we get functional tests. We look at gut permeability and intolerance to wheat out of the gate because a large percentage of people with actual osteoporosis have undiagnosed celiac disease. Or they have undiagnosed non-celiac gluten intolerance. And so we look at that for everybody, because even if people don't eat, I don't eat gluten, but they actually, that crouton slips in there or whatever. It's good to know, right? Because if you are extremely intolerant, even that one crouton will mess up your gut for weeks. And so it's really important to know. You have to treat yourself like you have celiac. So we look at that. We look at what's called a diurnal cortisol. So we look at the curve of your cortisol excretion from your adrenal glands throughout the day at 4 different points, or 5, depending on the test. So that tells us what's happening from an adrenal perspective. And then we pair all of that with your genetics. Now we can tweak that. Well, actually I missed 2, but we can tweak that based on your history. And I'm sorry, the 2 that I added recently, because I was finding the need for everybody. We actually did add a stool study, which is not, necessarily fun to do, but it tells us about gut function and it tells us about the microbiome, right? And so it's one of those things. It's like, well, you don't have to do it, but you should. And then the last thing we've started doing is a tox screen. So heavy metals, mold, and environmental toxins, because there's plenty of evidence to suggest that plays a significant role in bone loss. And if you're losing bone rapidly and you're getting really sick as a result of it, it's because you've stored all that crap in your bones. So it's important to know. And so then we take all that information and we come up with a plan based on lifestyle, based on supplementation, based on nutrition, making sure you're getting enough calcium, preferably from diet, if not from supplements. Then we talk about hormone optimization for those. We talk about peptides, and we talk about medications. And on my team is an osteoporosis medication expert, and I actually know a lot about them too. But this guy works for the National Osteoporosis Foundation, and all he does is osteoporosis medication. And so we do every case. We run, we look at everything, and we make a plan. Now, we don't push the medications, but we at least want to have that conversation with you to say, look, this is where you are. If you have severe osteoporosis, these are the recommendations, and we're happy to prescribe, help you get it or not. But I want you to at least know, because most people coming to me, they don't want to be on medications,
Right.
but they haven't actually investigated them.
Hey, so if you don't mind, we did a whole couple shows on hormone optimization with a friend, Dr. Robert Yoho, who used to have a hormone clinic. He left he was doing plastics surgery procedures, and then he thought it was amazing how he got to doing hormone optimization, because he said that a lot of the stuff that his patients were wanting to look better, he couldn't fix with surgery. So he's like, we need to tweak your hormones. But so tell us more about the peptides, because that's, I think, for a lot of our listeners, something that they don't really hear that term or know much about.
Yeah. So the primer on peptides is essentially that peptides are these cool little molecules. They're essentially short proteins. So a protein is made up of amino acids. And then a peptide is just a shorter combination of amino acids. So it's basically a short protein. They're interesting because they live in the space between pharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals. So they should be prescription products if you're getting good quality ones. They are prescription products, so you have to work with a physician who understands them, but they are not FDA regulated because drug companies don't make them. And so they sort of live in this weird space. They are definitely under the eye of the FDA. The FDA would like for them to go away for the most part. But they're very powerful, and they have very significant impact if they're used appropriately. And basically, they're signaling molecules. So the most famous peptide that is a drug, the most famous peptide out there is probably insulin. And so it is a short protein that has a very strong signaling response in the body, right? It tells your cells to take up glucose and grow and do all kinds of other fun stuff. The peptides that I recommend for people that have osteoporosis generally fall into two categories. So one is going to be for people that have a dysfunctional gut, particularly a lot of increased gut permeability, or leaky gut, it's called. I like to use a peptide called BPC-157. So that stands for body protective compound. And it's this cool peptide that has pretty good human studies behind it, and has good human studies actually on gut permeability. So it's one of those that I feel confident standing behind. And essentially it helps to repair the lining of the gut so that it can help to absorb what it's supposed to, but block out what it's not. So that's one that I do very commonly. That's an oral capsule. So that's an easy one. And then the other group that people sort of cringe a little bit because it's an injection, like most peptides are, is in the categories of growth hormones, secretagogues. And so what that means is essentially your body can utilize growth hormone, or your body does utilize growth hormone to heal and repair every day. Every time you go to sleep at night, you get a spike of growth hormone, and it's part of the healing process. That spike gets smaller and smaller as we age. So one of the things we can do to help people to maintain muscle mass, to improve their body composition, to have a little bit more energy and pep, is to provide these things that help not just to give growth hormone, but to help the natural secretion of growth hormone get a little bit bigger again. So those are things like sermorelin, ibutamoren, ipamorelin, different versions of the same thing. So I like that particularly for my older, really lean osteoporotic women who are struggling to maintain muscle mass.
Interesting. Is that something that patients can? Tim's pointing at me. Thanks. Yeah, that's me. So can they buy those over the counter, or do they really need to go through someone like you that knows what they're doing to get the dose right? Yeah,
if you Google, let's say you Google sermorelin, can you get it shipped to your door from somewhere? Probably. And where you get that from is from companies that are making it under the guise that it's used for investigational or research use only. And it'll clearly say, not for human consumption. But lots of people do that. That is scary. Please don't do that.
No.
Please work with a physician who understands them, and then get them from a compounding pharmacy that knows what they're doing and is highly regulated, because they could be dangerous. I mean, you're injecting something, right? So it could be dangerous if it's not actually what you think it is.
Good advice, as always. Any other new things on the horizon out there that you like in health optimization? I mean, there's so many things that I hear in different podcasts and things that I'm researching, but I just want to know what you think.
I think that one of the things that I love is tracking. So I love tracking data. I'm just one of those, tracking people. Like, I know you guys, your audience can't see me, but I have an Oura ring on and I have a Whoop strap on, and I used to wear a Garmin watch on the other wrist. So I just like having the data. But one of the challenges with tracking is it's just kind of all over the place. So I have my app for Aura and I have my app for Whoop, and I have my workout thing. And then if you're tracking macros, like you guys were talking about earlier, right? Like it's, I have like 15 apps, and it's I like it and it's overwhelming. So for my patients who don't like it, and even like my wife is a great example. She's like, I don't have time for that. So I think that one of the coolest technologies are, and it's out there, it's real, is our apps that have algorithms that can connect with everything, combine it all, right? So you have one app that tells you about your sleep quality, your sleep quantity, your calorie, your intake, your activity, your recovery. You can just put it all together and then send it to me, right? Exactly. So you don't even have to look at it. I want to look at it as your physician, and I want to be able to say, hey, you're training too much, or, you need to ramp it up. I think that the next level of that, which I don't think is available yet, would be like some kind of a way to get, blood data in there. So the CGMs, the continuous glucose monitors that exist right now that have a little, indwelling filament, having something like that then attaches to it that can give you, this is what I would love, is continuous insulin measures. Glucose is good, but I would love to see for my diabetics, as they're getting better, I want to see what their insulin looks like over time. That'd be amazing.
What do you think of, I see it advertised, when I'm on Instagram and it flashes up as an ad, is it the Noom, or which one is it, where they're advertising those glucose monitors for not even diabetics, but just for people to track their own carbs?
So there's a couple of different companies. I think the one that's doing the biggest advertising push right now is Levels.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And they have a bunch of celebrity endorsers. And so I've used Levels, and the one that I actually like better, I don't have any affiliation with them, but the one that I like better is called NutriSense. And they both use the same sensor. So it's a sensor that you can prescribe for patients. And like I said, it's a little thing that goes in your arm, has a little indwelling filament in the subcutaneous tissue, and it can tell you what your glucose is over time. I think it's a really cool tool. I like the fact that they're marketing it to not diabetics, because so many of us don't understand the impact of certain carbohydrates on our metabolism, and I've used them multiple times, and every time I use it, I still learn something. And the last time I did it, I learned, that I shouldn't eat 2 rolls of sushi, because that much rice for me creates an incredible spike that stays up for, 8 hours. A great example too, like corn chips, just a couple corn chips, and I have this traumatic, looks like I'm a diabetic and I'm in a crisis. Or the opposite is true. So you could say, compare ice cream to oatmeal for breakfast. People say, oh, oatmeal is great for blood sugar. No, it's not. Oatmeal is better than garbage for blood sugar, but it is not better than something that doesn't have that much carbohydrate in it. And so I did this and posted on it and said, which one do you think was oatmeal? And one was ice cream and one was oatmeal. And the ice cream had a much better curve because it had so much dietary fat in it.
Yeah.
And so, it is really helpful for that. And I recommend it to a lot of, and anybody with metabolic dysfunction it's really cool. But again, it's one of those things, like it's a little cumbersome, like you have to stick the thing in your arm and you have to understand the data, and then it doesn't work. And so it's not perfect yet. And I would just a quick caveat about Levels versus NutriSense is NutriSense, you can use a finger stick and calibrate the measurement, whereas with Levels, at least when I used it, you couldn't. And I think that's a weakness in their platform.
Mm-hmm. What I'm hearing is that
we need to invent it.
The corn dog may be the perfect food then, because
the dietary
fry
fat with the corn.
the carbohydrates, You have many different animal proteins all mixed together. And it's
I'm going to share the story of that in the post-show for the people that want to hear that.
On a stick.
I'll share that story later. Right. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, we just spent an hour, and I come up with the stupidest thing possible. But
well, this has been great. So I know that you have licenses in multiple states, and so we, if any of our audience is in one of those states that you're licensed and really wants to find you and seek you out, where would they find you? A website? What do you recommend?
Yeah, our main website is optimalhumanhealth.com. And so that's the best place to go. You can look at, especially I try to do, and we're doing more, but I try to do blogs, and part of my mission is to educate as many people as possible. So we try to make as much content free as possible. So Optimal Human Health is where you'll find the majority of things. The bone health specific stuff we're putting on optimalbonehealth.com. And we're trying to attract people with osteoporosis to that site specifically for that reason. I share some of my own stories and kind of combine the two on social media. So I'm mostly on Instagram with the handle Dr._Doug Lucas. And then Optimal Human Health and Optimal Bone Health are both on Instagram and Facebook as well.
Great. I always link those in our show notes for people as well, so they can follow the links and find you there too. Any last words of advice, tips? I always like it to
Yeah, I mean, I think that the big takeaway for me in the world of optimization is be an advocate for yourself. Don't expect that your insurance company or even your primary care doctor has your best interest in mind. And that's not a slight on primary care doctors. It's just that the system as it is right now is designed by guidelines, which we discussed, and insurance companies are really only interested in making their shareholders wealthier. So you have to advocate for yourself. And that, in my opinion, takes health optimization above and beyond what we're doing otherwise.
Perfectly said. That's my thoughts too. Awesome.
No, fantastic. You are your body is your greatest possession, and the fact that people sort of ignore it is just beyond belief to me. Not like I've never done bad things to my body, but it is just, it's still, I mean, it's the only interface you have with the present realm. You might want to take care of the interface.
Well, thanks again for being here. Everybody's going to love this episode, and I know that I just could talk to you forever, but I will stop.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah. And it's been fun. And yeah, I could definitely have this conversation again. So maybe we should do part 2 sometime.
Absolutely.
Would love to. Hey, no.
Well, again, it's never ceased to amaze me how you put yourself out there. We started doing the podcast and we start requesting interviews and talking to people. And then one person connects us to another, et cetera. And we realize that even though we thought we were, outliers, there's this entire kind of subgenre of medicine where there's been a lot of people calling BS on what's been going on. And it's super encouraging because there's a lot of people that are, a generation younger than us that are really doing what I think is exactly what should have been done in healthcare for a long time. And the downside for some people is, it's largely cash-based, which I think all of this medicine should be cash-based. That's another discussion. And, make an investment in your health, because we have absolutely seen personally what happens. Some of the things that we've done with regards to personal training and diet counsel, et cetera, et cetera. Again, cash-based, total investment. I mean, people buy $100,000 pickups because it makes them feel better. Well, what if you actually did something that really made you feel better? What's that worth?
Yeah. I mean, invest in your health, your body, because, if you want to live a long, fun, healthy life, it really makes a difference. And honestly, it's a lot cheaper than $100,000 pickup, I think. But you can pick your treatments. But I think everybody will love the talk, especially, we dabbled in a little bit of the nutrition side, some of the diabetic concerns, but bone health, which is his passion, doesn't get a lot of attention. And I really hope people, hung in there to the end to hear about how important it is for the looking at your risk factors screening. It's not just women, but men, and how taking care of yourself is important, because all it takes is one catastrophic and unbeknownst to you, weak hip, and boom, you're done. I mean, and hey, coming from the life of someone who's had a hip replacement, it totally alters your life, what you can and can't do. Goodbye running. I mean, I really had to mourn that loss. But if you're old and you have a catastrophic, I can't even say the word today, catastrophic hip fracture. I mean,
catastrophic.
Meow. I want to pronounce the P in a funny way with a P. Catastrophic hip failure really, I mean, a lot of people die from complications of that, and it's a big deal. And trying to reverse osteoporosis at that stage of the game is just playing catch up. That doesn't happen. Yeah, so really important on bone health.
Well, and the other thing is, from a bigger theme, I think it's fascinating that like two things can be true at the same time. And I'm going to say that hopefully every podcast, because it's been one of my biggest frustrations in the last year, is that you're in one tribe or the other. You're in the vaccine tribe or the not vaccine tribe. You're in the this, the that, the natural. I only do what's natural. Oh, okay. So you die prematurely from an infection. No, of course you don't only do what's natural. You do what's reasonable. And the point is that a lot of these things are not going to have the same kind of evidence that's there for pharmaceuticals because it doesn't go through the FDA. Doesn't mean that it doesn't work. And a lot of it is so safe that it doesn't matter if you have these big efficacy trials. But like Doug was saying, you're never going to get them because you can't patent insulin. Mm-hmm. You can patent a subtype of insulin, which is what's happened, and it's very expensive. And so there's things in the healthcare system that's so throw sand in the gears that we have to have other alternatives to live our best, healthiest lives. And that doesn't mean that you ignore pharmaceuticals, and it doesn't mean that you ignore hospital systems. I mean, all of those things are really important, but there's a place for them. Just like there's a place for hormone replacement, and there's a place for peptide treatment, and there's a place for personal trainers and exercise and appropriate diet. All of those things need to be in their right place. And what's happened is we've gotten so completely out of balance where, I mean, for watch a college football game, they have advertisements for prescriptions because your penis is got a bend in it. Like,
I didn't think you were going to throw that into our lovely
curved
podcast.
The curved carrot. Like, how insane is that? Like, if you went back 100 years and told people that there's going to be prescriptions because you have a curved carrot and you have to inject it and then massage the medication in to treat it, like, come on, like. So the pharmaceutical side has gone completely nuts. On the other hand, there's people that, unless it's 100% what they say, quote, is natural, they don't want to do it. Well, no, both can be right at the same time. They have to be the right thing at the right time for the right problem. And that's the key. That's what I love about the name. It's optimal health. It's not perfect health. It's not, infinite youth. It's optimal. You got to optimize what you want to do. You got to optimize aging, and there's ways to do that are not super expensive, but will require an investment of tremendous amount of effort, time, and some money. There's no question of that, but you can live a better life with really good advice.
Yes. Amen to all of that. And so on that note, if you want to optimize your health in another way that we love, endorse, and use, seek out hyperbaric therapy. It is like a game changer for your well-being, for healing issues, multiple things, from brain health to orthopedic injuries to
athletic recovery,
flesh wounds to bruises to athletic recovery. And that's our friends at Hyperbaric Therapies in Eugene, actually called New Leaf Hyperbarics and Wellness, and they are located at 1200 Executive Parkway in Eugene. Check out their website. I'll link it in the show notes, and love it. I can't say enough about it. All right, everybody, check us out on our socials. If you like us and like this episode, please share it with your friends and send us any requests, and we'll see you next time.
Have you heard of hyperbaric therapy?
If you want better circulation, oxygenation, or respiration,
Turn up the volume.
everyone appreciates the increased energy and clarity.
Athletes say goodbye to those PRs because you're going to blast
So
them.
how's it work?
We load your body with oxygen.
That means
Less inflammation,
fewer allergies,
faster healing, and more.
Come see us, 1200 Executive Parkway.
You know, the Upside Down building.
Call us 541-636-3278.
That's 541-636-3278.
We have some incredible deals.
Heal, build, and thrive
With New Leaf Hyperbarics.
Got air?
It's no secret that medicine is a bit, uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more, and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
While we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible, we can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.
And maybe you should put the bent carrot in the bloopers.
No, I think it's appropriate, and I don't think he would mind. Unless, of course, he has a bent carrot, in which case that would be maybe too sensitive. Bentcarrot.com.
I was just thinking, maybe actually that is not outrageous, because for some people, that's part of their optimal health.
Correct. But, you know, if I was going to get bent, I don't want just bent. I want, like, the duck, like ducks have a corkscrew penis.
Oh, my gosh. Don't put that in there. Okay, so I'm going to call you the Duck Doc from now on. Okay, we forgot to tell the story about I told everybody we were going to tell the story at the end about the corn dog, and we totally forgot.
What, that I ate a corn dog? That I haven't eaten
And why?
Why did I eat a corn dog?
Yeah.
Well, because it's the perfect food. Clearly. No, I ate a corn dog because...
No, but how are we going to put that into the very end of the show?
Well, he can use it as a blooper.
All right. Okay. Blooper.
Well, he could put all this in as a blooper.
Oh, that's like
because,
it's gone forever.
Well, that's if people want to listen, it's bonus after.
Well, all right.
So it's
corn dog. Okay, corn dog story. What happens? We go to the local market, literally right at the bottom of our driveway, because Tim's got to get himself some healthy beef jerky for his protein. Yes. And some side Red Bulls.
And a grip of Red Bulls.
Well, unbeknownst to us, the power was out, and they're all standing outside, and they dared let us enter if we had cash. And they were trying to empty their hot food cart.
And it was free corn dog day.
And literally, how many did they have left?
They're like, do you want 5? And I go, no, I would require a divorce attorney if I take 5. So I had 1.
I allowed him 1.
I had 1.
None touched.
But strangely, maybe coincidentally, the corn dog did have a bend and a curve in it, like a bent carrot.
Bent corn.
Bent corn dog. So I injected it with whatever it's called, massaged it into the dog.
Did you enjoy that corn dog? It's going to be another year till you get one.
Yeah, I know. That's good.
There you go. Corn dog story.